In this chapter, we're going to discuss working capital and the financing decisions that are involved in properly managing working capital. Now, when you hear the word working capital, or the words working capital, you need to think of current assets. Working capital means current assets. We're interested in the financing and management of the current assets of a firm. In particular, we're interested in two current assets, inventories and accounts receivable. Think about a retailer. In order to make sales, they first have to purchase inventories to stock the shelves. That purchase is going to require them to make payment. So they're going to have to pay for the goods that they sell before they sell the goods and collect cash. So you can see that there's a mismatch between when the goods are paid for and when the cash is collected for their sale. In the interim, the firm has to finance that. Now, for a retailer, in most cases, we don't think of retailers as having accounts receivable. Well, many other sorts of businesses do. In fact, Home Depot, for its commercial sales, or Lowe's, for commercial sales, will grant credit to contractors, and the contractor will get a credit card. So even after the good leaves the store, the company hasn't yet collected any cash. Both of these items, inventories and accounts receivable, we tend to think of assets as being a good thing. It's good to have a lot of assets. But in fact, the asset we'd really like to have is cash. And both of these require us to use cash for some period of time in order to make profits in the longer run. So we're going to convert cash into inventories. Those inventories, when we sell, will be turned into accounts receivable. The accounts receivable will be eventually turned back into cash. In the interim, we have to be able to finance those activities. We have to be able to stay in business until we get the cash back again so that we can start that cycle all over again. Working capital management, unlike some other elements that finance professionals are concerned with, requires immediate action on a day-to-day basis. Receivables have to be collected. Decisions have to be made about how much inventory to purchase. So there's actually day-to-day decision-making that goes on in working capital management. And in truth, working capital management is one of the more time-consuming elements of most finance professionals, corporate finance people's activities. They do a lot of this, and they do it on a recurring, regular basis. If they don't do it properly, even though these are short-term sorts of actions, in order to have a long-term, in order for the company to stay in business in the long term, they have to become masters of the working capital management function. Let's think for a moment about the nature of asset growth. One of the keys to determining what sort of working capital the firm's going to have and what sort of asset growth they're going to experience is the firm needs to be able to forecast its sales levels. The sales level forecast is then going to feed into other elements, in particular production schedules. So once those sales forecasts, and this is where marketing, for example, comes into play, where finance touches on the marketing function. Marketing is going to assist in making those sales forecasts in many cases. But after we've made an estimate of what those sales are going to be, that has to be tied into a production schedule. So if we know how much we're going to sell, we work backwards to know how much we need to buy, to look at the timing. When are we going to produce our product? Are we going to produce it and then hold it in inventory for a long period of time, or are we going to try to produce a little bit, are we going to try to produce in a manner so that our inventory shows up just at the time that the purchaser is ready to make a purchase? Now, invariably, we're going to discover that our forecasted sales and our actual sales will differ, perhaps in terms of timing. And that can lead to a couple of problems. One, an unexpected buildup of inventory. This is a problem that retailers face if there's a slow Christmas selling season. They buy in expectations of a certain level of sales. If the consumer is facing a difficult financial environment, they may choose not to buy as aggressively as when Christmas rolls around, and the store is faced with inventory sitting on the shelves that they really need to get rid of. They need to get rid of that inventory so that they can collect the cash and make payments to vendors. So having extra inventory sitting around is an impediment to being profitable. That's a bad thing. Having said that, sometimes sales levels outstrip what the forecasts were, and in that case, you might see inventories falling to levels that are too low. In particular, if you discover that you've sold everything on your shelf, you're missing a sales opportunity when someone comes in asking for a particular product, and you say, well, we don't have that anymore. In some cases, they might come back at a later time to purchase. In other cases, they might go to a competitor and purchase from somebody else who has been able to more accurately forecast their sales. So both of those are conditions that are you're likely to want to avoid. It's hard to know what exactly the optimal amount of inventory is so that you never have too much and you never have too little. So you're really, that's part of the reason that this is a daily activity. We can think of the current assets of the firm, and right now we're talking about receivables and inventories, as being sort of two potential types. One we refer to as self-liquidating. Self-liquidating, let's take the example, say, of a vendor who sets up seasonally to sell Christmas trees. He purchases trees from a supplier and sells the trees in the days and weeks and days before Christmas. On the 25th of December, he needs to have all of his trees sold, and he will have collected for all his trees. Most of them work purely on a cash basis. They have no receivables. And so in this case, his current assets, his inventory, the trees, are self-liquidating, meaning that at the beginning of the season he has none, at the end of the season he has none, and he's collected all of his receivables, so there really are no current assets at the end of the selling season. They're all gone. He's completely liquidated it. Contrast that to, say, a Walmart that has what we refer to as permanent current assets. Certainly after the Christmas season, if you were to walk into a Walmart or any other major retailer, you're going to discover that the shelves don't have as much on them as they once did. Having said that, they're not going to be empty. You won't ever walk into a major retailer and discover they just don't have anything. There is always some level of inventory that's on hand, and for other business there will always be certain levels of receivables. So in a sense, these current assets, which the accountants describe as assets that are going to be collected within a year, there's a fraction that physically just won't go away. They're going to be part of your assets forever. Having said that, there will be increases and decreases in current assets over time. So retailers particularly like to stock up in September and October for the selling season. So you'll see a lot of inventory in retailers in the late fall, relatively little in early January. I think it's probably worthwhile to look at a little graph here that sort of describes the nature of current assets. And the top graph we see self-liquidating assets, self-liquidating current assets, and we refer to this as temporary current assets. So along the bottom here, you notice fixed assets. They aren't really important to this discussion, but the firm's going to have some fixed assets typically. At the beginning, for self-liquidating assets, at the beginning of a selling season, say over here, the firm is going to purchase inventories, and those inventories are purchased early on in the season. Then they're sold. After they're sold, any receivables that are outstanding are collected, and at the end of the selling season, we're back here with no current assets at all. They truly are temporary. Then we start the season all over again. So this might be our Christmas tree seller. Here we are at the beginning in Thanksgiving of one year. This is Thanksgiving of the next year. This is Thanksgiving of the next. Obviously, the Christmas tree seller really he's disappears after about a month. So he has a self-liquidating current assets that disappear, and we're at a flat line for 11 months, and then we start to have a little hump all over again. Contrast that with a firm, perhaps a retailer. This is not just retailers, but they're easy for us to picture. We all understand what those are. Retailer also, of course, has current assets down here, but in addition to the seasonal variation that occurs, right, there is some amount of current assets right in here that we can think of as permanent current assets. And as the firm grows, the level of permanent current assets is likely to grow as well. So when we talk about permanent current assets, that's what we're thinking of, is this little wedge part that I'll now put in red, this little wedge part right here. The temporary current assets are the things that are the parts that self-liquidate over time. We need to be able to manage both elements of current assets.